Why don't we go ahead and begin at noon, and we'll just sort of move forward, and when people join us, they join us. I know that people are, hey, Kenning, hello. So let me call this meeting to order and ask for introductions. I'm Bruce Newell, Chair of the Commission. Kenning? You are inaudible, sir.
Have to do it at least once a meeting. My name is Kenning Arlich. I'm a commissioner from Bozeman.
And Elsie? Commissioner Arnson? Moving along to Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Jenny Stapp, State Librarian.
Thank you. And then we'll just kind of, so I don't get hopelessly lost here, I'll just kind of follow people on my screen. Genevieve.
Genevieve Lighthizer, Admin Assistant.
Thank you. Melissa.
Melissa Brick, Central Services Manager.
Thank you. Ashley.
Ashley Candidge, accountant for Montana State Library. Woo.
Excellent. Evan.
Evan Hammer, State Library.
Sharon.
Hi, Sharon Hardwick, HR Specialist for the Library.
Thank you. Joe.
Sorry, it took me a minute to get I'm Joe Fleck. I'm the CE coordinator for the State Library.
No worries. Good. Let's see who else is here. Elsie.
Hello.
Hi.
Yikes. Do you know how many Zoom calls I've already been on today? This is a multiplication question, not even an addition. So good to see everybody.
Good to see you. And we'll work at being efficient here, Elsie.
Thank you. If you're looking out the window, it's snowing, right?
It is. And who is a PCC library?
That is Lori from the Petroleum County Library in
Okay, great. Welcome, Lori. And Tracy.
Tracy Cook, Montana State Library.
There you are. And Ken, I see you've popped up on my screen.
Yeah, good. Well, from Missoula.
Great, thank you. And Kathy. We'll skip then to Jonah.
Jonna Underwood, Sheridan County Library, Plentywood.
Jonna, forgive me. Pat.
I don't think Pat has a mic, but she put in the chat from Pat from Iwalaka.
Okay, and Pam Benjamin.
Hi, Pamela Benjamin, Trails Coordinator.
Excellent. And Bryce Maxwell.
No W on that, Max L. It's a battle I've been fighting all my life. I'm the program coordinator at the Montana Natural Heritage Program.
You know, I had a second cup of coffee midday yesterday, which cost me lots of sleep. Bryce, I apologize.
That is just a fact of my life. Matt, sorry. My son is already dealing with it, so.
So I assume if I came and rifled through your tool chest, you wouldn't have a silver hammer. Let's see, who have I missed? Bobby?
Yeah, hi, I just got here. Bobby DeMontney, librarian at the Montana Department of Transportation.
Great. And Pam Henley. Well, we'll check in with Pam later. So in the interest of moving along, so this is just a kind of an information meeting and a chance for you to ask questions, ask Jenny questions. I'll let her do most of the heavy lifting on this call, but So this federal rescue funding was sort of an incredible opportunity for the state library and for Montana libraries and the people of Montana. But you know, it sort of dropped into our laps all of a sudden. And thank heavens that we've got, you know, a long practice of talking with our clients and with our partners about what we need to be doing, whether we have the funds to do that or not, the resources to do that or not. So some of that stuff is sorted out. I hope that all agencies were able to do that, but it was, you know, all of a sudden, what do you do with all this money? I really thank Jenny and staff for the hard work and the diligence that they exhibited last week. I can only imagine. You know, I've actually never had that problem in all my professional life of having to spend millions of dollars overnight. But and this process isn't over. You know, it's sort of there have been hearings and some and Jenny will describe this in more detail. But this is not a done deed, and this is why I thought it was so important that the commission had a chance to ask Jenny questions, offer comments and suggestions, and so that you're set up. If you get questions over the next couple months or next month, and also to better inform Jenny's and staff's actions as they move forward. Any questions about what we're doing today? There's going to be no action. We're just talking here, folks. Okay, Jenny, take her away.
Okay, thank you. Well, as Bruce said, the American Rescue Plan Act is going to result in fairly significant additional funds for the state library, as well as the state and local governments, schools, and other entities overall. And things are happening very quickly and in a process that I would describe as sort of a hurry up and wait process with lots of zigs and zags along the way. And so I think it's right and appropriate to just bring everybody up to speed, share with you what we know at this point to make sure that there are no surprises. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to walk through some of the spending concepts that we've been discussing with the legislature in the last week or so. For those of you who are not as familiar with the legislative process, because the legislature is in session right now and these funds are being appropriated to the state, it's their responsibility to appropriate those funds because they're in session. And so they are working against very tight deadlines to put together a piece of legislation that appropriates those monies in some way that can make it through the transmittal process, be heard in the Senate, and go through that legislative process overall before the legislature reaches their 90th day and concludes their session for the year. So that, for that reason, in part, things are happening very, very quickly. The challenge for everyone is that these monies have been appropriated by Congress, but the actual details, the federal rules and regulations, including how and when these dollars have to be spent, are still being ironed out at the federal level. And so it's challenging for the state, for the governor's office, for the legislature, for those of us in agencies that are receiving direct appropriations to be able to make really well-informed decisions right now at this point in time. So we're juggling compressed timelines with a little bit of lack of information. I think that describes the process fairly well, and Superintendent Arnson is certainly heavily involved in these discussions as well, and may have her own views and insights into how the process is working. So last week, Joint House Appropriations and Senate Finance and Claims Committee met to just get a high-level overview of the ARPA Act and what it means for the state of Montana. Then the committees broke into our budget subcommittees, and you've heard me refer to the fact that we report to the Education Budget Subcommittee. So we met with them last Tuesday, a week ago this last Tuesday, and put forward a number of spending concepts. And because some of those concepts pertain to other budget sections, we also had the opportunity to share many of these concepts with the Section A, General Government, and Section F, Long Range Planning Subcommittee, as well as a select committee of Senate Finance and Claims and House Appropriation members that are hearing more general spending concept ideas. I will run through what those ideas are in just a minute, but to give you a sense of where we are in the timeline, those subcommittees then made their recommendations to the full select committee last Friday. From there, the legislative leads from those committees, as well as the governor's budget office, worked through the weekend to put together a plan for how to take these spending concepts and other information and compile that into amendments that will be amended into the legislation that they're working on, which is House Bill 632. So a very, very kind of bare bones skeleton of a bill exists. It's House Bill 632. What Chair Jones said on Monday is that essentially what is in House Bill 632 right now will be completely eliminated, and these amendments that are coming forward will take their place. And so right now, House Bill 632 is in House Appropriations. That's the normal process for appropriations bills to take their course, and they are hearing amendments related to the funding categories for ARPA, and will be taking action on these amendments later this week. The amended bill will then go to the full House. It'll then transmit to the Senate. There'll be hearings in Senate Finance and Claims. So as Chair Jones reiterated on Monday, the bill is going to change substantially throughout this process. Largely the work that's happening in the House right now is simply to try to get a bill in some kind of form ready to be debated on the House floor so that it can transmit to the Senate in that transmittal timeline. The other key thing that has happened in the last few days is that they are starting to develop the idea that in some of these funding categories, there will be application processes down the road. So what we're seeing in some of the amendments is language that sets up commissions that would hear applications for project ideas for funds, with a pool of funds appropriated for each of these commissions to grant out through an application process after the bill is finally passed and approved. So that is new information as of just the last few days. So it's quite possible that some of these spending concepts that I'm going to talk about might not actually appear in House Bill 632, and we would then have the opportunity to submit applications for funds down the road. But I think it's prudent to continue to advocate for funding through the legislature, whether it's House Bill 632, House Bill 2, something like that, while the legislature's in session. Any questions about the timeline and the process right now? The legislature is targeting their 90th day right now is May 11th. Of course, they could adjourn or recess sooner than
that. Jenny, thanks. That's, I think, very helpful. Sounds labyrinthian, but very helpful. As you describe these projects, could you sort of tie them back to their communities and to the planning process that passed through the commission's hands in the process?
Happily, yeah. So you have in your commission materials, and I'll ask Genevieve to bring up the select committee recommendations document. There you go. So the first line item, the IMLS funding silo, are the dollars that are appropriated through ARPA to the state library through the Institute for Museum and Library Services under the umbrella of our Grants to States program. So the same category and criteria that we use for our Grants to States program and some of the policies that govern that program will govern these funds. And as you all know, with our CARES Act funds that we received a year ago, coupled with some funding from the governor's office and additional grants, we've been funding a hotspot lending program. We've also put a significant amount of funding into e-content, including our Overdrive contract. We worked with schools to support a school library ebook contract with Overdrive. We worked with Pamela Benjamin and Trails to make sure that we got some funding to academic libraries to support their e-content needs as well. In preliminary conversations that we've had with staff as well as the Network Advisory Council at their meeting earlier this month, those were the two areas of highest priority for continued investment going forward. Particularly the funding that we have for the hotspot lending program will run out and expire at the end of September of this year. And so the request is that we continue to fund that program really for as long as the dollars will allow. And then we know that there's continued need for additional e-content. There's an opportunity to bring on more school libraries into the school library ebook consortium. I think we're currently serving around 140 school districts, so an opportunity to bring on more. There's also an opportunity for us to support more Montana-specific e-content and get that into the hands of learners, content through the Montana Memory Project, state government information, and other kinds of digital content that we have responsibility for. So those are very high level concepts that have been discussed by the legislature. These dollars will be appropriated directly through House Bill 632 to give the state library the authority to spend those dollars. The exact details of how we spend them will continue to work out with staff and the Network Advisory Council and bring those recommendations to the commission.
Jenny,
and I'm just going to, please go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Can you explain that the first row, the IMLS funding silo in ARPA, what does that have to do with ARPA funding that goes to the state or gets distributed through the state?
So we have to have legislative authority to spend those dollars. And because the legislature is in session right now, it's within their purview to grant that authority. A year ago, when the legislature was not in session and the funds were awarded to the state, we went through what's called a BCD process, or a budget change document process, to get that authority through the governor's office. Because the legislature is in session, they have the responsibility and authority to grant that authority to the state library to spend it. So we have to go through this legislative process to get that authority. And there are a number of other, what the legislature and the language of the bill is referring to as silos of funding that will be included in House Bill 632 that are ARPA monies that are earmarked in ARPA for specific purposes. But it is within the purview of the legislature to grant that spending authority.
Thank you. And then I noticed that the hotspot lending program is mentioned both in that row and as a separate item a few rows further down. Is that intentional, appropriate?
It is, yeah. So you'll see both the hotspot lending and e-learning digital content a little bit further down. In addition to funding through IMLS, we've asked for even more money to be able to expand those programs. The funding that's being requested within IMLS would allow us to maintain the existing programs, but we have asked for more funding to continue to grow those programs. So I'll just move on down the list quickly. The Newsline item We've talked about this in relation to House Bill 2. This was a request from the National Federation for the Blind to have a state agency be the program sponsor for the Newsline program that they support. And funding was appropriated in House Bill 2 through the state library for that purpose. The legislature had appropriated $120,000 for the biennium as a one-time only restricted appropriation for a pilot program for that service. This is a way for the legislature to fund that effort using ARPA dollars rather than the general fund that was appropriated for House Bill 2. So there's since been an amendment to House Bill 2 to remove that line item from House Bill 2 with the intent of funding Newsline with ARPA dollars. The House Bill 632 amendment that the House Appropriations looked at this week, it still only has $120,000. We had suggested $240,000, allowing for a 4-year pilot. Most of the ARPA dollars have a 4-year spending period, but right now what is in the amendment is a 2-year program. The statewide broadband mapping effort is something that we've talked about and pushed for many, many years. The state had a broadband mapping program when there was American Recovery and Reinvestment Act dollars. When those dollars ran out in 2013 or 2014, that program folded. And so the state hasn't had any kind of broadband mapping program since that time. You are all aware of some of the mapping work that we've done related to mapping of broadband availability in schools. We've overlaid that with information from state agencies. The request here is that we have funding to be able to develop a broadband map, integrate it into our structures and address data sets, and have a workflow that would allow us to maintain that over time. There will likely be, and I'm sure you've read the news media, a significant appropriation of funding for broadband investment. What we are likely to see in House Bill 632 is the funding mechanism, the authority to spend those dollars. Senate Bill 297 will likely be the vehicle for a number of significant policy decisions, including organizational oversight for broadband. And we're arguing that for the state to understand where they should prioritize investment, we need to have better mapping in place for them to do that work. And we've been in conversations with the governor's budget office over the last week or so about this ongoing need. The internal wiring is probably something that's relatively new, but it does tie back to the Gigabit Toolkit study that we conducted in 2019. You'll recall receiving the report from Simmons University last year that looked at the greatest needs in libraries for broadband and internal infrastructure to support high-speed broadband. The state of Utah used some of their CARES Act monies to invest in internal wiring and new routers and wireless access points and managed services to help manage their internal connections for broadband. And so we've requested $3.8 million to stand up a program that's very similar to what they're doing in Idaho to meet the needs that have been called out in that Gigabit Toolkit study. I've mentioned the hotspot lending program and our interest in extending that program. We currently have hotspots deployed in 44 counties. We would like to see them deployed in all 56 counties. And so this would give us the funding to be able to do that. The LiDAR request would allow us to take advantage of the federal 3DEP program that you're familiar with to complete LiDAR acquisition for the entire state of Montana. I know Troy has presented to you a couple of different times on the progress that we've been making, where we've leveraged largely federal dollars that have flown had trouble with this last week too. Flowed through state agencies, and the federal USGS 3DEP monies to complete that LiDAR acquisition through that program. So the request is for $8 million that would leverage an additional $12 million from the USGS to complete that mapping effort. The wetland mapping money, we've requested 1.5 million to map the remaining quads in Montana that don't have current up-to-date wetland mapping. And then the real-time network funding, we've talked about this again with regard to House Bill 2, and some of you who were on the commission for a while will recall that this has been a priority that we've talked about with the commission for 2 to 3 years now. We were approached by the tribes and the Montana Department of Transportation a number of years ago about trying to stand up a real-time network of GPS repeater locations that can support surveying and precision agriculture and autonomous vehicles and a wide variety of other needs. In House Bill 2, there is the one-time only authority to spend existing MLIA dollars that we have in our MLIA account to initiate the program and have some funding for some of the stations necessary to develop the real-time network. The request for $4 million here would allow us to provide more coverage across the state to get that statewide real-time network in place. Without this funding, there would be a need for us to apply for grants and seek other sources of funds to complete that network. So the LiDAR, wetland mapping, and real-time networks are all priorities that have been discussed at length with the Land Information Advisory Council. They appear in the Land Information Plan. Importantly, LiDAR and wetland mapping are the only 2 of the 15 spatial data infrastructure themes for the state where we don't currently have complete mapping in place. So these funds would allow us to complete mapping of those 2 themes.
So
The
Jenny,
argument,
I'm sorry. I'm mindful of my promise that this would be a half-an-hour meeting, and I don't want to chop you off, but I do want to ask, are there any commissioners that have questions or comments that they need to get off their chest right now before we continue with a little bit more detail?
The only thing that I would add, this is Elsie, is that we're working with DPHHS. These dollars have flown to all government agencies, not all of them, but majority of them that do serve Montanans in any a realm of specific. We're looking at a partnership. And I know when it comes to what we're doing here with the e-learning digital content, as well as with the hotspot lending program, I think that bridge possibly can go further besides just what I can do with the Office of Public Instruction. So I think partnerships is something that we can do to make the dollars relevant, as well as to make sure that they are going forward in a great manner. The only other thing is these are federal dollars with strings, and reporting to the legislature, because now they've captured the dollars. And so I know in my world, we're looking to make sure that there's robust communication with the legislators in the interim. So let's think longer is what I'm sharing here. Let's think longer in how we're going to communicate these messages out to patrons, to libraries, to legislators, so that the value of the dollars is not disbelieved, but held in a very high esteem and believable.
Good point, Elsie. We're being asked to make sure that we can speak to the objectives for how we use these funds, measures of success for these dollars. I put documents in your meeting materials that were requested by the budget office that provides more details about all of these programs, the dollars, how they would be invested, how we see leveraging them, the communities and stakeholders that they support, all critical information to communicating the value of these investments.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners regarding this? And forgive me again, Jenny, for busting in here.
No, you're good.
If people have to be someplace else. Okay, take her away, Jenny.
I would just going to say that the last two, the e-learning and the workforce development resources, are concepts that we've talked about before the education subcommittee. No one has really bid on those at this point. So those are lower priorities on this list. So again, at this point, we continue to advocate for these spending concepts with the legislature. We'll be watching today and tomorrow as some of the remaining amendments to House Bill 632 come out. It's possible that we won't see any of these, with the exception of Newsline and the Imls funds, which are already in the amendment from Section E. So we may not see any of these. We may be told we have to apply for these dollars through an application process. There may be opportunities to amend these ideas at later points in that legislative process. So lots up in the air at this point, but we wanted to just really make you aware of the kinds of ideas that we are talking about with legislators and why they're important to us and our stakeholders.
So commissioners, does this all sound like we're headed down the right track? Anyone with any concerns? Or any enthusiastic, my goodness, we're doing exactly the right thing comments?
It's some amazing opportunity and I'm glad you're jumping on it.
Yeah.
We got really fantastic feedback last week from legislators, from industry people, especially for the LiDAR and wetland mapping, real-time network opportunities. You know, we're really demonstrating how these dollars can be leveraged to fund the other projects that are being considered when the legislature is looking at ARPA-related projects.
Bryce, how does this look to you?
Sorry for the slow response there. Great. I mean, like you said, it's so wonderful to jump on this opportunity.
Well, it's astonishing opportunity.
Bruce Evan has his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Great, Evan.
Just one quick comment. We've talked about what's in here. One thing that's not in here that we have had some questions about from legislators is the 911. We've got some 911 funding through House Bill 50. We have explored that, and as far as we can see to this point, there isn't a place in one of the existing bins of money through ARPA that fits with that kind of funding. So we've let them know we don't necessarily have an aversion to trying to find some funding there, but we're just unable to make that fit at this point.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from others attending this meeting? I don't see any hands raised. Jenny, do you want to kind of sum up? It sounds to me like what we have is you guys have made a great start on pulling together a package that's going to be good for folks, and that makes sense in terms of the monies that are being made available. Sounds like we have another, what, a month, 6 weeks before we know how all this will sort of settle down. And I see a hand up, Bryce.
Bruce, I just wanted to note that I think work that Jenny and Evan have done since 2017 when we got our budget cuts is why we're in the position we're in now in terms of working with legislators. So thank you for years of effort.
Yeah, Bryce,
Right.
exactly right. This didn't happen overnight, and I am so proud of all you guys, yourself included, Bryce, for getting us to this position, and proud of the library and the state library community more generally for the model of sort of open books and seeking partnership and discussion for coming to these points. This feels to me like maybe a hint of our just rewards. I've seen comments from legislators that have praised the state library and state library staff for their striving to take and be stewards of the trust which has been given to us. And golly, that is really gratifying. So Jenny, do you want to kind of wrap things up here?
I do, and I have a quick, I understand if people have to drop off, but I do have a few other things I want to just make the commission aware of. So wrapping up, hold on to your seats. That's my summary.
Okay.
and we'll just go from there. We are already having preliminary conversations about what it would take to put these dollars in action as quickly as possible, because certainly that's one of the important things as well. And many of these dollars could be put on the streets very quickly through existing contracts. For most of these, we have programs in place already. So it's just extending that kind of work. More related to some of the legislation that's moving through, we see making some fairly significant number of hires at the state library. And we're already beginning to talk about what those hires would look like and taking steps to make sure that we can do that work efficiently. So I'm just so grateful that we've invested in the state library the way we've invested in the last couple of years, so that we are well positioned to take the steps necessary to seek this funding and we're not caught on our heels. So lots more to come there. I did have a few other things I feel like I need to make the commission aware of. Happy news. You saw my email about House Bill 50 having passed Senate Energy. So that will have a second reading on the Senate floor. Maybe tomorrow, it's not up today. So maybe tomorrow, otherwise probably early next week. And then it will get referred to Senate Finance and Claims. So we have one more budget hearing on that bill as that one works its way through the process. House Bill 49 was passed by Senate Finance and Claims this morning. So it has one more vote on the Senate floor, just third reading, straight up vote, no debate. And then it should head to the governor's office for signature. And we continuing communication with them to make sure that there's no question that the governor will sign that bill as it reaches him. So fantastic news. That's of course the MLIA funds that really help restore and maintain the funding and the services that we've been talking about for these last several years. So good news there. Couple of other pieces of information. I've continued to be in conversation with Mr. Van from the Flathead about his art donation, and Bruce and I have worked on the details of a deed of gift that make it very clear that the art donation that's in question would become the property of the state library without question. We've suggested a period of 10 years where the piece of art would need to be publicly displayed. And then after that period, it would be up to the state library to determine what we would do with that piece of art. And so that deed of gift was sent to Mr. Van last week. I've described it to him on the phone. He didn't express any reservations. He expressed that he understood that he was giving up this piece of art and any authority over that art permanently with this deed of gift. So just a heads up on that action. You will still see that request as an action item at your April 14th meeting. And then finally, as if we didn't have enough on our plates, the Attorney General's office approached us about wanting to take over the state library space. We occupy the Justice Building with the Attorney General's office and the Supreme Court. And there's been a lot of back and forth about where the state library might go if they took over our space. Right now, it doesn't sound like there is a space available that would accommodate our needs. And I'm really grateful to the budget office for making sure that people are looking out for our needs. Of course, part of all of this discussion is just the changing nature of our work and workforce related to the pandemic and opportunities to allow for more remote work, more hybrid kinds of work options that we need to take into consideration as we balance what our work looks like, what the cost for rent looks like, and how we support the future of our work. So at this point in time, what has largely been decided is that the Attorney General's office will move in and occupy that space in the lower level of our building that we used to occupy. We don't pay rent for that space. It's not ours. It's up to General Services who they lease that space to. And so the plan would be for the Attorney General's office to begin to remodel that space and begin to occupy it. As we move our Talking Book Library services to a duplication on demand work model, we know that we'll be able to shrink the footprint for those cassettes pretty significantly in the next year to 18 months. And so with those plans in mind, we would intend to move that operation upstairs and absorb that space, that workflow into our space on the main level. And the AG's office would then have the opportunity to occupy the space that's currently occupied by the shelves of the cartridges. The idea is still that we would maintain our conference room space in the lower level. This is all very fluid at this point. People want to try to accommodate this change. The AG's office has about 4 different leased spaces around Helena that they want to consolidate into one location, saving money for the state. We've been very forthright in saying that we need an adequate workspace that will meet our needs before we consider any kind of move. And as I said, we've received good support from the governor's office supporting us in that demand. But I do think this creates an opportunity for us to think about what kind of space we might occupy, whether or not we can save money in our own rent and still meet our needs in a way that supports our staff and our workflows.
Finally, any questions about that little bombshell? Well, I promised this would be a short meeting, and it's carried on a little bit longer than I had promised, and I apologize for that, but it has obviously been great stuff. I apologize to several of you who I didn't give a chance to introduce yourselves at the beginning of this, including you, Tracy. It's a little bit like watching Hollywood squares, and the squares seem to mysteriously juggle around, and I think I missed a couple folks, and I do apologize.
One more really quick update. We
Yes?
no longer need to hold a special meeting the week of May 17th. The MLIAC will get their work done to make recommendations for the land information grant program in time for your April 14th commission meeting. So I know we had kind of had that on hold pending the academic library symposium the week of May 17th. So that's no longer a need.
Yes.
If I may squeeze one thing in, I just posted a link. This was something I meant to mention last meeting. It has nothing to do with anything that's been on this meeting, but wanted to be sure the commission was aware. This year represents the 90th anniversary of the National Library Service. They've kicked off a year of events with a concert that actually was on the day of the last commission meeting. So again, apologies for not letting you know then, but they recorded it. Matthew Whitaker, who is a jazz pianist and NLS patron, has done several free concerts to promote the NLS. And the link here is to a concert that he did on the evening of March the 3rd to kick off their events as part of that 90th anniversary celebration. So enjoy.
Well, thank you very much. So Jenny, you good? Okay, well, thank you again for attending. Another, just to reiterate, thank you to staff for your terrific work in the past and through this exciting month that we've had so far. Lord knows what will happen in the coming month and a half. I'll look forward to talking to all you commissioners on the 14th. Is that correct? April 14th. And be aware that we'll have that meeting with the commissioners at the Montana Library Association meeting, albeit virtually. If you have any questions about this, I wouldn't be surprised. Contact Jenny and copy me, please, just so I can kind of stay on top of things. And we'll talk to you all later. The meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Genevieve.